Great. Thank you everyone for tuning in to Telehealth Fair Secrets to Success webinar. My name is Milton Chen. I'm the founder, CEO of VC and This American Dog. And for today, I'm really excited to have Ed joining us. So Ed, if you read his bio, is credited for the person behind California's telepsychiatry network behind the prison system. I think he built the largest the network of anywhere in there. Extremely excited to see his insight. I guess Ed, I know people can read your official bio in there. Is there something about you that's not in the typical bio you can share with the audience that's maybe like just something different?
Oh, sure. So a couple things about me. Something that I'm a big time skier, and I was teaching skiing in Colorado. So that was kind of fun. And another thing that I think is unusual about me is that I don't like Star Wars. I'm sorry.
Glad why you don't like Star Wars.
Yeah. You know, I used to love it, and as a kid growing up in the 80s, I loved Star Wars, but I don't like it so much anymore.
I see. Okay, got it. Okay, awesome in there. And thank you so much. I think what we'll do is, how about we turn the floor to you and you can present some of your thoughts in there. Then we can open up to the audience member for them to ask questions again. So please.
Okay. So should I go forward with the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, can everyone, so can you see the screen then, Prison Telepsychiatry?
Yeah.
Okay, so, you know, first thing I want to ask is, which country has the highest rate of incarceration? And that's probably a question everybody can answer. Unfortunately, it's us, the US. We have the highest incarceration by far in the world. And I mean, it's a tragedy, really. It's land of the free, home of the brave, and we're locking people up. 2.3 million people behind bars. I mean, just take a moment to let that sink in. 2.3 million of our brothers and sisters behind bars. A lot of them are Hispanics and blacks disproportionately. It's a tragedy, you know. It's representative of failure on the part of America to take care of our population. And how do we get here? So really, you can see here a graph that shows the incarceration rate of people under state and federal jurisdictions per 100,000. Now you see in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, you see a massive spike in the number of people that are incarcerated. And think about why that's the case. You might have some ideas. One of those factors was deinstitutionalization that started in the late 50s. And what happened was deinstitutionalization means that you close the state hospitals that were housing people with serious mental illnesses that in some cases were refractory to treatment at the time. And what happened was they closed the state hospitals and other facilities, and all these people didn't have a place to go, so they went out to the street. Ultimately, there was a big homeless population that started because of this, and a lot of people getting arrested for crimes of mental illness, you know, like trespassing and other crimes of mental illness. And what happened then was these people would fill up the jails and prisons. But you see here in the late 70s and 80s and early 90s, you have the war on drugs. And that was devastating to America. You had mandatory sentencing, which meant that people who were using marijuana, maybe if they, like 3 strikes law, if they used marijuana, got arrested for it a few times, then they'd have a life imprisonment. And this is not right. It doesn't make any sense to take the decision out of the hands of judges and make it mandatory that people serve time that cannot change. And then, of course, the war on drugs filled up our prisons with people that had substance use disorders, and they had a disorder, they had an illness of substance use, and instead of treating them, we locked them up. And so we took on a culture of incarceration to this day. Now, here we see the percentage of US inmates who are mentally ill. Now, in the local jails, you see a very high percentage in the county jails of mentally ill people. About 2/3 of them are mentally ill. In federal and state prison, it's about half of the people that meet criteria for a significant mental illness. Now, this does not even account for people with substance use disorders. So this is non-substance use disorders. If you add in substance use disorders, you have about an 85 to 90% people who are afflicted with substance use disorders. And so the vast majority of the people that are in prisons and jails need help from a mental health professional in some way. Now, let's talk a little bit about what happened in California as a success story. So the California prison system telepsychiatry program was developed from its roots to about 70 psychiatrists in a matter of only a few years. And I was proud to be part of that, leading the way on this one. And we serve people in over 25 facilities, and we serve all levels of care, from outpatient to inpatient. We even have helped the state hospitals with healthcare via telepsychiatry through the Department of Corrections in California. So that was a tremendous success story. And so why does it work? Okay, this is me seeing a patient. And why does this work? Why does correctional telepsychiatry work? Several reasons. Doctors like to be in a comfortable environment. So as you can see, I'm in my office, it's comfortable, it's quiet, the temperature is just right, and it's clean. And that's one of the best predictors of job satisfaction, is being in a clean and comfortable environment. And in a prison and jail, that's usually not the case. So it's usually a dirty, dark, musky, dusty environment. And the inmates are the ones that typically are in charge of cleaning the environment, so you can understand why it's not like a hospital in terms of cleanliness. So having a job that allows you to work from home or work from a comfortable environment in an office space, it leads to more job satisfaction, and you have more of a retention of doctors that way. Now, it's good for the prisons and jails. The facilities like the fact that we're out of the way, because we get in the way sometimes. The prisons and jails were not originally designed to have healthcare staff walking around, and the fact that we're outside of the system does help them with their safety and security and the general functioning of the prisons and jails. It also reduces transport risk and cost, because if you have a jail or prison that's not located in an area that can hire psychiatrists, you might have trouble when a patient goes into crisis. Oftentimes we see people who the staff on site thought the patient was in a crisis, and it turns out they just need their meds. They just need to see their psychiatrist. They just need their therapy. And if you can provide that, you might actually prevent the necessity of transport, which can put officers, nursing staff, and inmates and the public at large at risk. Another advantage is that we can reach multiple sites all in the same day. You can go from the north to the south, and it's just in a split second. So that leads to efficiencies, and you can deploy resources that way. You can bypass gates and elevators. If you have units that don't need a psychiatrist full-time all day long, it doesn't matter. You can do a couple hours in the morning and then switch to another location. You don't even have to ride the elevator, which can be quite slow sometimes in prisons and jails. And those gates, if you worked in a jail or prison, you'll know that sometimes you stand there just waiting for the officer to open up the gate, and that can pretty much half the time can be consumed by that. So telepsychiatry actually has been proven to be more efficient that way. Now let's talk about the hurdles. There are several hurdles, and this is probably not all of the hurdles, but 5 select hurdles for creating a correctional telepsychiatry program. The first hurdle is buy-in and support. I mean, you can't do this alone. You can't do this without the help of the on-site administrators and central headquarters administrators, whether you're working in a prison system like the Department of Corrections in California, or in a local jail or jail system, county jail system. You need buy-in and support. So in a bureaucracy, Oftentimes, I've been told no. And what I've learned from doing this, from working with state and local governments for so long, is that no actually means not yet. So oftentimes bureaucrats, they see what's right in front of them and not long term. Some of them do. Some of them see it long term. So you have to choose those people to be your champions, and don't get discouraged when a bureaucrat says no, because oftentimes that just means we're not ready for it yet. But you got to keep the conversation going, and that cycle that can go on for about a year and a half, 2 years sometimes. But in the end, usually they say yes if it's a good idea that can save money and make everyone's job a lot easier, which is what telepsychiatry does in a correctional environment. Now, what you want to do is demonstrate the proof of concept. So you say, just give us a little project, maybe one jail or one unit, demonstrate that through data that it can be more productive, higher quality sometimes than even on-site psychiatry. You're going to always need on-site psychiatry. So we're never a threat to the on-site psychiatrists, but it is important to state that in our experience, we have been able to prove that we are more productive and of higher quality than sometimes the on-sites may provide. But of course, you need on-site psychiatry, and there can be high quality on-site psychiatry as well. And you want to celebrate the successes. So anytime you're running a team and a matrix of people, you want to always celebrate the successes, because that's why people do it, because they want to see the product of their work. They want to see that they're making a difference. And with California and other areas, we have demonstrated success, and we celebrate that success. Now, when you're recruiting and managing staff, it's really important to support your doctors and empower them. Now, doctors cannot be treated like widgets. They can't be commoditized. You can't think in your mind, well, if this doctor doesn't work out, I'm going to replace him with someone else. There's a difference between doctors, and there's some really high quality ones and not so high quality ones, just like any other industry. You're going to have good people at the job and not so good people at the job. And you want to support and empower the people who know what they're doing and are in it for the right reasons. And you want to, in order to maintain your staff and to avoid staff and for retention purposes, you want to protect continuity of care as much as possible. Although telepsychiatry enables us to go from one prison to another and to change the assignment of each doctor, you really do want to see if you can protect continuity of care, because that's what it leads to a therapeutic relationship. In some cases, for example, the inmate reception center, that may not be a goal that we pursue, because that's just not how it works. Patients are seen once and then they move on to the next thing. So in some cases, continuity is not the most important thing, but overall, it's something that's worth protecting when you can. And then the supervision matrix is also very important. As a leader of psychiatrists via telepsychiatry, I don't lose sight of the fact that there are on-site administrators too that are part of the supervision matrix. And it's really important that you communicate with these people. So the telepsychiatry leadership and the on-site leadership, they have to get along. They have to be on the same page with stuff. And sometimes that means a little bit of compromise, but it's always working together as a team. So IT issues, that's a big one too. And it's the never-ending question of build versus lease. So if I want to create a telepsychiatry program in a county jail, do I build it or do I lease it? And some of the really important questions to ask yourself and your organization is, how much do you want to spend? What kind of quality do you want to have? What's your reliability needs? And how flexible do you need to be? Now, one of the big advantages of leasing or hiring, for example, I'm on here with VC, which is an excellent service. One of the things to consider is, do you want to build it all yourself, or do you want to leave it in the hands of the experts that have been doing this? This is their bread and butter, and this is what they do every single day. Now, there can be a role for both. So there can be a role for a local IT. You're going to probably have to have a local IT anyway. But working hand in hand with a company like VC or a telehealth vendor, it's really important that the IT staff locally and the company that provides the services work together. But in this day and age, I used to say you can choose to build or you can choose to lease. At this point, I think that it's pretty clear from my standpoint as an executive of a telepsychiatry company, I don't want to build a platform myself because that's not my bread and butter. And I want to be able to trust a company to say, this is what you do and we do what we do. Audio and video is a very high indicator of whether you're going to be successful or fail. So you want the quality to be there. And nothing ruins a program like bad audio and bad video. It bothers the patients, it bothers the doctors, and it leads to failure. So, but on the other hand, if you have good quality of audio and video, which is actually easy to achieve this day and age, then you're going to be successful. People love telemedicine. Working with custody. So I say here, listen first. You got to put yourself in custody's shoes. Custody meaning the correctional officers that are there to keep the safety and security of the prisons and jails. They have a really hard job. And it's easy as healthcare providers to discount what they do, just as it's easy for custody to discount what healthcare does. Sometimes they call us care bears and hug-a-thugs, and that's not helpful. But at the same time, I would say that I've worked with many custody staff that believed in the healthcare mission, but you want to understand them first. They have a very tough job. They're dealing with inmates that can be very unruly sometimes. They can be very combative, hostile, and really difficult. So you want to be able to, listen first, understand what they have to deal with. And we came later. We didn't, prisons and jails were not built for us from the beginning, and they're not really designed for us to be there. So we're a little bit of an odd duck, and we have to find a way to fit in. And so that should be at the top of our mind when we're seeing patients and we're dealing with custody officers. You want to be able to win the hearts and minds of these people. And oftentimes it's helpful to keep your eyes open for the custody officers that are real healthcare champions, that are the ones that really believe in the mission of healthcare and can make things happen. Sometimes it's lower level custody staff, sometimes it's a lieutenant or captain, and in some cases it's the warden. So you want to be able to engage with the people that actually believe in the cause. Space issues are another challenge, always a challenge. Like I said, these places were not usually designed for healthcare staff to be there. Fortunately, telepsychiatry is really helpful because we can put it in the smallest of spaces. We don't need the doctor to come on site with his desk and chair and take up a bunch of space. We just need a little bit of camera, and we put it in whatever space can accommodate one patient, and that's usually enough. So it can be challenging, though, even to find the smallest of spaces, especially if you're looking for a confidential space. There can be differences between the inmate reception center and the regular clinics in terms of the level of confidentiality. So you want to make sure that you spell that out for the patient and get their permission to see, hey, is it okay? There may be some limitations in confidentiality. One of the ways that there are plenty of ways to get around it. One of the big ways is you can put a headphone on the patient so no other inmate can hear what the doctor is saying. Now, coming soon, there are going to be all sorts of technology upgrades for working with inmates and working within a correctional atmosphere. And one of them, I think eventually, one of them is going to be that there's going to be a screen in every single unit, in every single cell, and we're going to instantaneously be able to pop into a cell. Now, I would also like to see one day we move away from prisons and jails. Like I said earlier in the green room, having prisons and jails represents a failure of us to take care of our own people and to create support that allows people to function in society. So I'd like to move away from prisons and jails, and that's my life's passion. So anyway, thank you very much for allowing me to present this, and I'll take some questions.
And thank you so much for that. Was really, really insightful. Can you come up, so tell me about your mother? Can you say that a little bit? How you open the session with them?
Yeah, so I'll tell you. I can tell you about my mother, but the reason why I put that up there is because I think the future is going to be automated, and with machine learning and artificial intelligence, it's going to be a game changer, and the way that we practice medicine is going to be very different. So that's sort of like a taste of what's to come.
Got it. That's a very eye-catchy.
Yeah.
Again, so we'll open this up to the audience. For the audience, feel free to type in your questions. We'll take them on the air. I guess as they're I think as you mentioned is there's always a need for on-site psychiatrists. I was a little bit maybe surprised or puzzled by that because it feels like when eventually you can almost replace all. Again, what are the things that a on-site psychiatrist could do that a telepsychiatrist cannot do?
Not much. Honestly, telepsychiatry can do almost everything that an on-site psychiatrist can do. And in some cases, we have advantages over on-site psychiatry. Like I was saying with the recruitment and retention and the ability to move from place to place in a split second, on-site psychiatrists can't do that. Now, on-site psychiatrists are important. Now, what can they do that a telepsychiatrist can't do? Well, if there's a catastrophic failure, like for instance, if my internet goes down right now, then I can't talk to you, really. I have to pick up the phone and try and resume this. So on-site psychiatrists are not as beholden to the technology. But the solution to that is to have fail-safe mechanisms to make sure that the technology is always on.
Got it. That makes sense. But in terms of market, like what percentage of the prisons and jail today already have like telepsychiatry versus like everything's on site now?
So it's still a small percentage. I mean, it's a great opportunity and to expand. And Orbit Health is expanding significantly and rapidly. So there is a great need across the nation, and that cannot be understated. I don't think that anyone's done studies to indicate what percentage it is, but I know that it's a small percentage that's growing very, very quickly. And another important thing to remember is that this concept has been proved. So we've been doing this. I've been in correctional telepsychiatry for more than a decade, and I've seen great successes, very few failures, and when we fail, we learn from that failure. So I'd say that the concept has been proved, and it's absolutely insane that we don't have more of it. We need to.
Got it. Okay. So we have a questions from the audience patron asking, so who pays for this?
Who pays for it? Well, in most cases, county and state governments pay for it.
Okay. Got it. So in this process is accounting they recognize needs and they'll contract with the firms like yours so they can now provide the service in there.
Yeah. So we've contracted with government entities and private entities. There is a private industry in prison too.
Okay.
So it's not just the private payers, but it's also, I'm sorry, it's not just the public payers, it's private payers as well.
Okay, got in there. So in terms of like, for example, if you're, let's say, psychiatrist practicing this, in terms of the rate you will get this, is it more like, how does that compare to things like the Medicare versus private insurance, cash pay? So like comparable, how does, yeah.
How does the rate of reimbursement compare?
Yeah, correct. For the physician, I guess the reason I'm asking is I know like psychiatrists, there's so much in demand, and a lot of them they don't even take private insurance. Everything just cash pay because they could get better compensation for that. So how does like a payment to a psychiatrist compare to like this?
So it really depends on the payer, honestly. Some government entities, some private entities, they try and lowball the psychiatrists and the vendors and say, well, we're only going to pay, bargain basement for telehealth. Others that are more evolved that see that you want telehealth. It's like your Air Force. You want boots on the ground in the form of an army, but you also need an Air Force. And organizations that have telepsychiatry, they are way ahead of organizations that don't have telepsychiatry. They have an Air Force. Other people are operating with just an Army. And so some people are willing to pay for that. An Air Force requires that you're willing to pay for it. And if you're not willing to pay for it, then you don't retain the doctors. So that, it's a hard question to answer specifically because it really depends on the payer if they're willing to pay for this service or not. If they are willing to pay for it, then we can hire quality doctors, reliable doctors, and we
Okay.
can retain these doctors and build a program.
Okay, got it. So we have a question from Brad asking. So I guess he's asking. There's sort of telecommunication limitations in the prisons, right? You cannot sort of use mobile phones or only landline. Like, what are some of the practical ways you have solved this? I guess.
So this is actually a great depiction of why telepsychiatry is sometimes better than on-site. I have my cell phone here. I can't bring my cell phone into the jail or prison. And people want to be able to connect with family and make sure that, you know, that there is access to the outside world. When you go into a jail or prison, you got to give up this.
Yeah.
So that's an advantage. Now, as far as the technology limitations and barriers, that's really up to the entity, like the organization. There are some jails that have really super tough policies on what can be communicated to the outside world and what doesn't get communicated, and the ability to connect to psychiatrists outside of the prison walls. That really depends on the local IT and central command IT, as well as the leadership and like, for example, the sheriffs and the people who run the prison facilities. But in terms of the actual technology, it's very easy to do. You just need somebody to turn the key and make it happen.
Got it. Okay. We have a question from Kimberly. This may be a slightly follow-up to there. So she's asking, have you provided telepsychiatrists to clients in segregation? If so,
Yeah.
what other equipment, like technology, do you use that?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. And we've done some really impressive, innovative things. Segregation is one of those really draconian, you know, medieval kind of things that we do, and it needs to go away, honestly. These people suffer considerably in segregation. There are people who have spent 20 years in segregation, and it drives them nuts, and it's absolutely crucial to provide care to them. And in fact, this is one of the most important use cases of telepsychiatry, to get a camera into segregation. And in fact, it works really well because segregation rules are so tight. It takes so long to get inside segregation. Oftentimes you have several sally ports, which is the gate that opens up for the staff to walk through. And if you have a camera right there in segregation, you avoid all of that. So yes, we have done it with great success.
Got it. Okay. So we have a question from Chris asking, so it must be, I guess, he's asking, challenging to obtain the medical records for part treatment. So, for example, in jail, how do you get access to medication records, all these things, before you provide the treatment?
So the answer to this question is much more auspicious than it used to be. So when we first started, when I saw my first patient over telemedicine, over the video conferencing platform, they had to ship the records to me. So my whole room was filled with records, and you would have been able to see records all over the place. And that was crazy. I mean, that was really difficult to do. Now when you have electronic health records, it's actually pretty easy to do it. Again, it's the same thing with connectivity. If you have decision makers that are on board, that believe in the concept and are progressive, and it's not even progressive, it's like, if they're up to speed on what's happening with healthcare, they're going to open the doors and let that through. And so these medical records, there's easy access if you have the right willpower for it.
Got it. So basically, now these days, you just log into some EMR, pulling the patient files, and it's as easy as that now. Or...
Absolutely. It's just the click of the button and you get access to the patient record.
Okay, excellent. We have a question from the audience, Brad, asking, so is having video critical to telepsychiatry to the prison? Can you just is just doing like audio only, is that good enough?
So Brad has a lot of good questions. So audio is not enough. To have a telemedicine encounter, you need both audio and video. Now you can have, and this is actually more of a legal and regulatory question than a clinical question. And I do encourage, anytime you want to do telepsychiatry, you need access to legal counsel, and that's not something that I'm providing right now. But generally speaking, in a non-legalistic way, I would say that you always need video or audio. If the video cuts out for some reason, you can probably do audio, but it's not usually a good idea. But sometimes in some rare situations where it's absolutely necessary, you might be able to get away with audio, but you don't want to make that the mode of care that you do on a daily basis.
Got it. Okay. So I have a question from Raj asking, so how about using the wearable devices to monitor like the psychological stress of the inmates and through there as a basis to provide treatment? Have you ever seen that done? With that, like, would that be useful? Or
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't think I heard the question. Are you saying, are there like peripheral devices for the inmates?
like
Is that what
the
you said?
wearables, from wearable, you can have these sort of from Fitbit to maybe like a stress monitoring to like just various way to like these wearable things that the patients will wear.
So that's not something that has caught on. That is something that it is being done in the telehealth community, not as much with prison and jail inmates, but one day it will be like that.
In there. Okay, if you had that, like how would like what would be like an ideal wearable? Let's suppose that you're gonna design the ideal wearable for the prison population. Like what will you measure? Like
Okay, so there are many things that I would like to measure, but let me give you an example. So the other day, I saw somebody with PTSD, and there is actually a blood pressure medication that can help improve PTSD nightmares, but you want to know the patient's blood pressure. If it's too low, then you don't want to give them a blood pressure medication because it can bottom them out and then they might pass out and it can be dangerous. So in the moment, I wanted to know, what is this patient's blood pressure? And rather than having a nurse come and take the blood pressure, I would rather have that information handy. Another example is Orbit Health. We treat a lot of people with substance use disorders. And oftentimes they come in withdrawal of either alcohol or benzodiazepines like Xanax. It's rampant out there. People are on Xanax and Valium and all sorts of benzodiazepines. They come to the jail and then they start withdrawing. Or even outside of the jail, in a non-prison setting, non-correctional setting, you have people that are in active withdrawal. And withdrawal without treatment can be deadly. So delirium tremens has a high mortality rate. And so what you want to be able to do is monitor their blood pressure and their pulse. And if you have that, then you can feel comfortable in prescribing certain medications, and also it'll allow you the opportunity to be able to protect the health care of the patient.
got it, got it. In terms of like the blood pressure, do you want that to be continuous monitored, or it's more like just at the beginning session, if it just do a measurement that's sufficient?
Excellent question. With things like withdrawal, it can be a situation where your blood pressure is normal right now, but then in a couple hours your body starts to withdraw even further, and then you have a dangerous situation. So if you have a wearable, and this is actually really important for a correctional environment, because sometimes after your appointment they go and sit in the cell, and then that's it. They don't see people for a while. And if you have a wearable that automatically flags a certain blood pressure and automatically sends a nurse or a doctor to come care for the patient, then you might be and in those cases you might be saving a life.
Got it, got it. Okay, that seems to be an interesting area to pursue in there.
Absolutely.
We have another question from the audience, Brian. So he's asking, so what's the price point for like a telepsychiatrist for the prisoner? Is it like hourly, or is it per patient, or?
That depends on the business model, honestly. And you can do an hourly, you can do a capitated plan where you get paid a certain fee for covering the segment of the population. You could do every evaluation you do. You see a patient, you get reimbursed for that. So the models are varied in this atmosphere.
Okay. Got it. That probably makes sense. It's just like buying all these healthy, everything's slightly different.
Yeah, everything's different. I mean, I think ultimately we're going to need to go into an accountable care organization sort of like philosophy for the entire nation, where we're not focused as much on fee for service, because when you focus on fee for service, you're incentivizing more care. And we're
Yeah,
not necessarily interested in more and more care. We're interested in quality care and efficient care and access to care. So
yeah,
accountable care is probably going to be the direction that everyone's going in over the next few years.
that makes sense. By the way, so in your presentation, you showed that like the huge percentage of the prison population has mental health issues. Out of that, what percentage of them actually get treatment? Like,
Oh, well, first of all, you have to recognize that a patient is mentally ill, and so you need good screening processes. So with our company, we're in the inmate reception centers and also in the clinics, but in the inmate reception centers where we identify if a patient needs care. And you would not believe how many people escape care for many, many, many years. For example, PTSD, I've mentioned it a few times already, but oftentimes in a correctional atmosphere, it goes unrecognized and
okay,
misdiagnosed as other things. And
okay,
what we found is that our doctors, we relieve suffering and we save lives because we identify that a
okay.
patient has a certain illness that needs to be treated.
Got it in there. So is it fair to say essentially almost today there's very, very small minority of the populations getting treatment. So the market is pretty well.
I would say that it's a continuum. I think that some people are getting no care and they need care. Some people are getting some care, but it's not perfect care.
I see.
Some people
Okay.
are getting care when they don't need care.
Okay.
That can happen too. And so what we do with our expertise and our ability is we can identify which people
Uh,
need more care, which people
yeah.
need, in fact, less care. We're able to do that too. And we identify people who have not had any care that need care.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Great. So I have a question from Randy asking, so how does the California handle the formulary issues in prescription? Because a lot of time the provider they might have their own set of go-to meds in there. How did you handle that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important that a formulary have enough medications that a doctor can treat every disorder and have a couple of options, several options to treat each and every disorder that they face. And in California specifically, now our company is not just in California, we're in other places, but the question was California. So in California, in the various systems that we're in, the formularies are usually very good and usually allow the doctor to prescribe several different medications. Now, if the patient needs a non-formulary medication, then what we do is we review the situation, and if we agree as administrators, we talk with the doctor and figure out
Mm,
whether this is really necessary. And we're never denying good care to our patients. Where
mm.
if there's a non-formulary option that makes sense, then we turn the key and make it happen.
Okay, got it. Okay. We have a question from the Didi asking, so within the jail, so the process for the medical calls, along with a lot of this sort of general jail scheduling, because something is sort of very much like a limit, the I guess sort of compliant and affecting early wake up, early evenings, like how do you navigate a lot of these issues within jail?
How do we? I'm sorry. So can you repeat the question? How do we navigate which issues?
Yeah, so in terms of, I guess, the jails, they have a lot of these process in terms of, when to wake up, like all these.
Oh, right. So like the programming. So when the
Yeah,
patients are waking up, when is shift change, uh,
yeah,
all of those considerations of working in a
yeah,
jail, right? The schedule, the
yeah,
operating schedule, when is pill line, all of that stuff. That's
yeah.
a really good question. And Orbit Health I mean, we're an expert at this. We're expert at navigating the correctional environment. And we've been doing this for a long time, in terms of being able to treat patients within the context of a jail system that has a lot of programming needs.
Yeah.
Um, what we do is we offer care in multiple points of the day. So like Orbit Health will put a doctor in a regular clinic, they'll put a doctor in the triage in the mornings, and we'll put a doctor in the triage at nighttime. And we always want to have an Orbit doctor in all the times where a patient can access. And when it's shift change, sometimes what we do is we stop the clinic and allow shift change to occur, and then we start the clinic up later. And so we organize the process around the needs of the jail. But yeah, I mean, Orbit Health is a company that is very used to doing that. And I, as a psychiatrist, I'm very used to working with custody.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for that. We have another question for Randy. So in terms of so any recommendations and tips on how to navigate the RFP process for these correctional facility? You know, typically it's very lengthy process, and is there any hints, advice you could give him?
So this one's tough because it's asking me about something. So I've been in corrections for a really long time,
Yeah.
and Orbit Health has people that have a lot of experience with corrections, and over time we've built bridges to lots and lots of administrators and people who know who we are and what we've done. And so the RFP process, that's something that, I mean, obviously you need people that have experience, that have connections with people that are going to know. I mean, the RFP process is open to everybody, but when you know and trust a certain organization as specializing in correctional telepsychiatry, like what Orbit Health does, that gives us an advantage. But for people that don't have that experience, what I'd say is just get into the space, get to know the people, submit your RFPs, and like I said earlier, the more time you spend in the system, the more you get to know people, the more they trust you, and the higher chance you're going to win an RFP based on your experience and what you can do for them.
Yeah, that's great advice. And Randy, I guess I don't have direct experience in the correctional, but if I generalize, we have a lot of experience working with the bigger government overall. It's something you just have to use the RFP process to get to know the program committees, understand their inside, and then you just keep on applying, keep on get to know them, then eventually then you win.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I would suggest is not to overpromise and underdeliver. There are actually a lot of companies and some telepsychiatry companies that will promise the world and say, "Wow, we'll do everything. We'll do on-site. We'll do telepsychiatry. We'll fill all of your needs,
Yeah.
and everything's going to be beautiful and perfect." And what we've seen as observers, I think objective observers of this, is sometimes people win an RFP and they totally flop on their face. So if you're a company out there that wants to submit an RFP, I'd say be honest, be honest about what you can do and don't overpromise and underdeliver, because that, you might get a short-term victory early on, but Orbit Health, we're in it for the long run. We're not in it for the short-term victory and then falling on our face. So I'd suggest that for other people who want to get into this space.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for the tip. We have audience Brian asking, so what kind of healthcare provider do you use? Do you use only psychiatrists, or do you also use psychologists?
So right now we use psychiatric prescribers, mostly psychiatrists, but we do utilize nurse practitioners as well. And so we have a team-oriented approach with that. But currently we don't have psychologists. Psychologists are obviously extremely crucial and valuable, and maybe one day we'll do that. But there aren't as many hiring shortages for psychologists and social workers and therapists. So right now, telepsychiatry, the main focus has been on psychiatry, but there's no question that psychology is going to have a piece of this, and it's going to help. It's going to be great when they do.
We appreciate the answer. In terms of, so another question from Randy asking, so he said he had difficulty coming up with a solid ROI for telepsychiatrists in the correctional space. So do you have any sort of insight or number, or maybe even references for him to do his research?
So he was having trouble seeing evidence of a return on the investment. Is that
right? Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, I can speak about the experience that I've had and my company, Orbit Health, has had. We've seen a return on our investment. We are profitable. And most important, I mean, there are economic returns on investment that I can tell you anecdotally. I don't know that people have done extensive studies on specifically return on investment on telepsychiatry, but I can tell you from experience, and everybody that I've talked to that's an expert in this field and has experience, telepsychiatry works in the correctional environment. It works, period, but it works in the correctional environment. It's cost effective, and probably more important than the economic drivers, which have been proven. Like I said, proof of concept has been done. I would say more importantly is we're seeing it in the patient's eyes and in the outcomes of the patients. We're preventing hospitalizations. Patients are doing better. On follow-up visits, they tell us, Doc, you know, I hadn't done telepsychiatry before, but this works, and you've changed my life. So from an economic standpoint and a human perspective, telepsychiatry has worked. I can tell you from experience that there is a return on investment.
Awesome in there. I have a question from Chip asking is, what about the provider licensing across state line? Is that the same as normal medicine? You have to have license in that state where the rule is more relaxed?
Yeah, so this is another legal / regulatory question that I don't necessarily want to answer absolutely and definitively. I will answer the question though. Generally speaking, again, this is not legal advice, but generally speaking, you want to have a license with the state where the patient resides.
Yeah.
And that's one of the crazy things about practicing medicine in America these days. Look, I can get in a car and drive through all 50 states and nobody will have any issue with that. But if I practice from California or from wherever, and I'm seeing a patient that's located in a different state, in most cases, that state medical board will want me to have a license in that state. Now, with the State Federation of Medical Boards and the Interstate Compact and the efforts being made to have reciprocity, that's definitely a step in the right direction. But we need to tell our governments that, look, you know, if I'm trained, look, I was trained all over the country, and I happen to be in California now. And if I move to somewhere else like Alabama or Maine or Mississippi, I'm still the same me. I'm still the same doctor. Why do I have to have another license? Why, if I want to treat somebody from California to Alaska, why do I need an Alaska license? It's crazy, and that needs to change.
Yeah, God, I appreciate that. Then we have a last question from the audience. Atif asking, so are you able to effectively provide the drug rehab counseling to prisoners by telepsychiatry?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of our main missions. Orbit Health is definitely, we're treating people with substance use disorders, and I think that it's quite effective. And substance use treatment works for sure. Now, of course, people come in and out of substance use. They relapse, and they go through periods of time where they're clean, and so you want to be able to see them in all phases of their addiction. And so it's really important that you have flexible solution like telepsychiatry that can see them whether they're in the jail, whether they're in the community, and it does work. So the answer is yes.
Got it, appreciate it. And then again, apologize not able to get to everyone's questions. Sorry about this. We'll get them we answer online. We'll post the recording later. I guess we wrap if I maybe ask you 3 just rapid fire questions. The first thing is so, I mean, you shared a lot of the really interesting things for the audience today. If you go, the audience can only learn one thing from you, like what would be that one thing you think is the most helpful for the audience to take away?
Well, I would say that telepsychiatry works for correctional environments, and Orbit Health has had success, a lot of success in that. And I would say, if I can say 2 things, okay? So one thing is we have the treatment, right? We can change the world, okay? It's right there. We have the technology, we have the doctors, and we have the expertise. But these people need help. And like you said, I mean, you were asking me about what percentage are in jails and prisons. Not enough. And so the one thing that everyone needs to learn is we need more people serving prisons and jails.
Got it. Okay. The next question is, what is something that one thing that you believe about digital health, telehealth in there that no one else believes in yet?
What's the one thing that I believe that other people don't necessarily believe at this
Yeah.
time? I would say that all information is knowable. And this is like an AI machine learning kind of thing. One day, we're going to have instruments that can measure all of the data that's out there. Right now, we've mapped out the entire human genome, and we're working on curing diseases on a molecular and genetic level. One day, all of these diseases are going to be cured. Prisons are going to go away because we're going to have the ability to change behavior on a genetic level. Now, the question is, on an ethical basis, is that something that we're going to be able to deal with?
Okay.
And so artificial intelligence and mental health and telemedicine, they're all part of the same telehealth program, and we're going to have the power to solve every problem. The question is, who's going to have access to the data? Who's going to have access to the treatment? And what's that all going to look like for society? That's going to be really interesting to see.
That makes a lot of sense. Then the final things, if you had, let's say, 3 minutes to privately talk with President Trump about telehealth, what would you say to him?
I would say two things to the president. So, Mr. President, if you're listening, we need to knock down some of these barriers. Okay, we need one license where you can see everybody in America, every U.S. citizen, every U.S. person.
Yeah.
We need to be able to see them all, and I think that the president can help with that. I think that he can push for that. The other thing that I would say to Mr. President is that we have a crisis here. Okay, we know about the opioid crisis, but we have a mass incarceration crisis here.
Yeah.
We need you, Mr. President, to step up. And you already commuted the sentence of a grandmother who was in prison for 21 years on a drug charge.
Yeah.
We need more of that. We need to get these people out of prison and in treatment for their substance use problems, because these are all Americans. And like I said, every year a population equivalent to the casualties in the entire Vietnam War dies with substance use disorders. But we have 2.3 million Americans that are also in jail and in prison, and that needs to stop. So the criminal justice system is really broken, and we need the government, the federal government, and all the local governments to fight for change, because it's not right. It's not right when I see somebody that has been in jail 100 times, and a couple weeks ago this happened, and it happens all the time where I see people over and over again. But this person that I'm thinking of, chronically, seriously mentally ill with paranoid schizophrenia, has no idea how to function in society, and he keeps getting picked up on trespassing and other crimes of mental illness. So that needs to change, Mr. President. We need your help with that.
It's really well. It's like, I thank you so much for sharing insight with us. Really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Milton. It was fun.
I guess Andrew stopped recording.